Welcome to Duel Academy's secret underground laboratory where we strive to answer the non-existent question, what kind of janky decks can you build in GX Tag Force 3? Today we're going to take a look at a deck focused entirely around Spellcaster type monsters featuring the one and only Dark Magician. First things first though, we have a couple ground rules for deck building, the first of which is that we must follow the default ban list included in the game, that being the March 2008 Forbidden Limited list from the OCG. It is possible via the game's DLC to update this list, but personally I prefer to stick to the default. Secondly, despite being a GX game, Tag Force 3 does include cards up through the set Crossroads of Chaos. While I do allow the use of cards from these early 5D sets, I am banning the use of Synchro Monsters. Not that I have anything against the mechanic, but at the end of the day this game is supposed to be focused on GX, and none of the NPCs are using Synchro Monsters, so I think it would just be a little unfair. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into the card-by-card breakdown. We start off the list with 3 copies of Skilled Dark Magician. With 1900 attack, this is one of the strongest level 4s that Spellcasters have access to. On top of that, he also has the effect that after building up 3 spell counters, we can tribute him to special summon Dark Magician from our hand, deck, or graveyard. Racking up those 3 spell counters is not exactly super difficult, so because of that, we can run 1 copy of Dark Magician. Dark Magician himself is a pretty big brick to be running in the deck, but since Skilled Dark allows us to access him from just about anywhere, it's nice to have the 1 copy. While I wouldn't exactly classify him as the ultimate wizard in terms of attack and defense, he is at least strong enough to swing over a monarch, which is pretty nice. For our last Dark Magician themed card, we are playing 1 copy of Dark Magician of Chaos. Demok is our boss monster of the deck, the strongest monster we're running at 2800, has the very nice ability to banish anything he destroys by battle, but most importantly, the ability to fetch any spell card out of your graveyard, which can just win you the game by itself. Moving on, we've got 3 copies of Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer. Just another decent beatstick at 1800 attack, but obviously the more important part, that graveyard disruption effect. We've got 2 copies of Injection Fairy Lily. That 2000 life point activation cost is quite steep, but the ability to run over just about anything in the game is well worth it. And I also find that she comes in handy a lot when you just need to close out a game by getting 1 last big hit of damage. Continuing on with the low levels, we've got 2 Apprentice Magician and 2 Old Vindictive Magician. Now, Apprentice Magician does give you an extra spell counter on summon, but the more important part is that when he's destroyed by battle, he floats into a level 2 spellcaster. And because it summons in face down, Old Vindictive with its flip effect is a perfect target. Speaking of flip effects, we have 2 copies of Gravekeeper Spy. 2000 defense makes for a decent defensive wall, but more importantly, because you get another copy of Spy when it's flipped, you can then use those spies as tribute fodder. For example, it can help with summoning our 2 copies of Magical Marionette. This 1 tribute monster may seem a little weak on the surface at only 2000 attack, but he can build up spell counters indefinitely, and for each one he gains 200 attack. Now that's still not amazing by any means, but it's much more worth it when you consider the second effect to remove 2 spell counters and destroy a monster on the field, again just adding more and more removal. Our last spellcaster is 1 Toon Gemini Elf. 1900 attack and a Spirit Reaper discard effect is pretty okay, but obviously we have to deal with the terrible Toon summoning sickness. It'll make more sense why we're running this when we get to the spell cards. Our last monster and only non-spellcaster monster is Neospatian Grand Mole. It's just such an annoying card to deal with, and if you can't tell, we're going for more of a control strategy based on having lots of removal, so he fits nicely into that. For our spell cards, we're running 3 copies of Toon Tables of Contents. The great thing about this card is that it can search another copy of itself when you activate it, meaning if you have 1, you can effectively get 3 spell counters out of it, and then at the end you get to search the Toon Gemini Elf. It's not amazing, and drawing more than 1 Toon card at a time is painful, but It does give you deck thinning and lots of spell counters, which is nice. You have to remember that the Endymion structure deck did not come out until 2009, so we're missing a lot of the powerful spell counter support. That's why we're kind of having to lean into some jank like this. Moving on, we have 2 copies of the Secret Village of the Spellcasters. This card is an incredibly powerful control effect, since if you control a spellcaster and your opponent does not, they cannot activate any spell cards. Yes, this can backfire if they clear your board, but because our deck is made up almost entirely of spellcasters, we have no problem establishing one on the board on any given turn and shutting our opponent out of all of their spells. After that, we have 2 copies of Book of Moon, 1 Fissure, 1 Smashing Ground, and 1 Lightning Vortex. These cards all just help us deal with our opponent's monsters, with Book of Moon having the additional synergy with Old Vindictive to maybe be able to reuse that effect. MST, Heavy Storm, and Giant Trunade are all here for obvious spell trap removal. Monster Reborn gives us Graveyard Revival, as does Premature Burial, and we have 1 copy of Swords of Revealing Light for some additional defense. Prima and Swords obviously also have that additional synergy with Trunade, which is always a fun combo to pull off. For traps, we're keeping it real simple. Mirror Force and Torrential provide us some powerful board wipes, and 2 copies of Royal Decree, which allows us to make sure we don't have to worry about trap cards whatsoever. This obviously combos really well with Secret Village, because we can possibly lock our opponent out of all spells and all traps. Here is a recap of the deck list. Overall, I think this deck is actually pretty solid. It has lots of good removal and some cool little tricks up its sleeve, but it's a little too inconsistent and lacking power in a few places, so I just don't think it's quite a meta contender. It is pretty fun though, and I gotta say, locking your opponent out of the game with Secret Village is very satisfying. Now let's go ahead and move on to a few duels, so that way you can see the deck in action and I can kind of walk you through the play-by-play. Okay, so our first duel is against Atticus, and as you can see, this is a pretty bricked hand. This is a good example of what happens when you just have bad draws. 3 tribute monsters in the opening hand. At least we have the Old Vindictive, so we can trade with that Enraged Battle Ox. Heavy Storm's not really going to do a whole lot here, but we can get in for 1900 damage with the Skilled Dark, so that's okay. Gene Warped though, that's going to be a problem. 2000 attack swings over the Skilled Dark Magician. Our Heavy Storm though, able to clear that back row. Goodbye Royal Decree. I set down the Torrential Tribute, hoping he would summon something, but he swings first, and main phase 2 summons the Panther Warrior. I decide to use it anyways and go ahead and take out his board, so that way we don't die next turn. Summon out Kaiku, and he has a Torrential of his own. Unfortunate. Chiron hits the field and does 1800. Things are not looking good, but we top deck the Skilled Dark Magician, which is just strong enough to run over the Chiron, so we're still hanging in there. We have the card advantage, but man, our hand is bricked right now. And he's going to go ahead and activate Stray Lambs, getting 2 lamb tokens, and he has a defense position monster, so building up his defense is quite a lot here. I go ahead and summon the Magical Marionette just to get it out of our hand. I activate Smashing Ground, that way we can get a spell counter and clear out one of these tokens, that way he can't go for a big 2 tribute monster, but he is able to use the Iron Blacksmith to search United We Stand. And then on his turn, he tribute sets, which I was very confused by. I go ahead and set the Spy, just so that way we have a kind of backup plan and something to do on the next turn, because I know we're not going to kill this turn. And we destroy whatever the Knight of Jackal is. I don't really know what that card does. It seems pretty bad, but regardless, Gene Warped comes back out via that Premature Burial, and with United We Stand is strong enough to kill our Magical Marionette. We are in big trouble here. I was looking through the graveyard there to see if we could summon anything back with Premature Burial, but there just wasn't any good options. I decided to go ahead and use Spy here to summon another copy. Now we have 2 tributes on board. That means we can bring out Demok. Go ahead and grab a spell card from the graveyard. I figure the best option is just Smashing Ground, so that way we can go ahead and clear the monsters off the board. Although in retrospect, Heavy Storm would have done the exact same thing, so it doesn't really matter. I decided to see if we have any good Premature Burial targets. We don't really have anything in the graveyard worth summoning, not anything that would end the game anyways, so I decided to just hold on to those life points and attack over Chiron. We pass back, he sets a single card. Obviously, if that's a Mirror Force or something, we're getting a little risky here, but I decide to summon Fairy Lily and try to end the game. but he has Book of Moon and can flip the Demok face down. That buys him one more turn here. I decided not to use Injection Fairy Lily because I don't want to die on the clapback. I could have just poked for 400, but it doesn't end up mattering, as on this next turn we can activate it and end the game. Okay, for duel number 2, we're taking on Truman, and this hand is just ridiculous. We open Secret Village and Royal Decree. I go ahead and pair that with a skilled Dark Magician because he has the highest attack in our hand, and we pass to our opponent. He sets 2 cards, but our Royal Decree is going to ensure whatever that back row is does not matter because he can't activate any spells or traps right now, which is just absolutely disgusting. He gets to search a Dark World here, but it's probably not going to matter because we just have him in such a bind. He's not going to be able to activate any of his discard cards, so we see him just set a monster. I think about using swords to reveal it, but then I remember he just searched that 2100 defender, so that's most likely what it is. I go ahead here and decide to summon the Injection Fairy Lily because I know it can beat over it. And sure enough, that's exactly what we end up doing. 1900 and 1800 direct here. This is a very bad situation. Ignore the black bar. I had a notification pop up that I needed to hide for the video. But regardless, here we go into turn 6. He only has 2500 life points. All he can do is set a monster. What is he going to do? Activate a spell or trap? Not on our watch. We draw Toon Tables, and while I don't need to use it here, I wanted to summon Dark Magician at least once for the style points. So we go ahead and stack up those spell counters, tribute him off, summon out the Dark Magician, and we're going to go ahead and end the game with exact damage. For the third and final duel, we're facing off against Alexis and her Cyber Angel deck. We see the Sonic Bird search out the ritual spell early, so we know that she's probably got the ritual monster or is going to find it soon. I go ahead and set Spy so that way we can defend here and summon out another copy, hoping to get this Magical Marionette online as fast as possible. Fissure comes down and is going to destroy one of those, but Monster Reborn is activated for some reason to bring it to her side of the field. I really am not sure why she chose to do that. Activate Royal Decree, and Spider-Man meme moment, she decides to activate one of her own. I was really not expecting that. Magical Marionette comes down, and then I go ahead and activate Fissure, popping the Spy and giving us that additional spell counter. I go ahead and walk over the Sonic Bird, and we pass back to the opponent. And she just doesn't do anything and passes back. Very strange, but okay. I go ahead and summon Skilled Dark Magician. I figure she's probably just bricked up on a bunch of like ritual cards that she can't activate, so I go ahead and get in for some damage. I thought about using Monster Reborn, but there just wasn't a target that would do enough damage to end the game. She is able to pull off a ritual summon though, and this Cyber Angel forces us to destroy one of our monsters, so she's going to be able to basically dismantle our entire field. Very unfortunate, but the top deck of Injection Fairy Lily here is pretty crazy because that means that we instantly have an out. I mean, we had the Grand Mole as well, but we wouldn't have been able to end the game with Grand Mole. She still would have had another turn, but because we drew that Injection Fairy Lily, we can go ahead and Monster Reborn back the Marionette, swing over the Cyber Angel by boosting with Fairy Lily, and that's going to give us just enough to be able to end the game. And that's going to do it for this video. This was a lot of fun to work on. I know making content for a 15-year-old PSP game is a little silly, but it was a lot of fun nonetheless, and I think I'm going to definitely make at least a few more. If you have any suggestions or any decks you want to see next time, leave them in the comments down below, and subscribe so you can get more Tag Force content.